Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Masterclass on credibility, about how to know when to trust information, when to doubt it, and how to be considered trustworthy ourselves. This American University Science Seminar is the first of 5 aimed at empowering truth, and it is a response to this moment in our nation when truth is in trouble. Over the next hour, we will look at data, take a poll, watch reporting, talk to journalists, take your questions via a Q&A tab on your screen and also on social media with the hashtag #CredibilityWithCurry. And no, I didn't choose that hashtag. Along with this seminar's co-producers, Cami Pine and Allison Wiseman, I hope you will come away having heard something that will be useful to you. Okay, let's get started. We all know that having access to truth is vital in our system of government. Truth has actually been essential throughout human history, allowing us to thrive and protect ourselves and the people we love these days in a worldwide pandemic. So who in a world of lies can we trust to tell us the truth? Let's take a look at what's happened to credibility, i.e. the quality of being trusted and believed. A graph based on a survey taken just this past October and November for the Edelman Trust Barometer shows that less than half of the Americans surveyed now say they trust traditional media. According to the chart, it plunged between 2012 and 2021. This finding is backed up by other surveys in recent years, including a Gallup poll that also gives us this graph. It shows polarization of trust in the mass media widened between 1997 and 2019 as more and more citizens began to strongly favor just the news media that supported their own political point of views. For context, trust in social media and in government also declined, and not just in the US, according to the Edelman survey. We might also want to remember that the survey was conducted during the pandemic and after the news media had been widely denounced as fake news and the enemy of the people. Still, the question must be asked, how much of this decline in credibility is self-inflicted, i.e. something journalists can do something about? While data on this question is limited, the Edelman survey gives us a strong indicator. It found that 56% of Americans surveyed agreed that, quote, journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or gross exaggerations. Another indicator, a Gallup poll taken late last year, found that 83% of Americans questioned said there is pervasive political bias in news reporting. So do you think there's a connection? Are journalists themselves contributing to this feeling that you cannot trust them, that this loss in credibility? For the sake of this conversation, let's take a quick poll. Do you agree or disagree that purposely misleading or exaggerated reporting have contributed to a decline in trust in the news media? Okay, let's look at what the class thinks. See if I can see the results. It looks like 85% agree with this statement and 15% disagree. Okay, that's really interesting. One more question. Do you agree or disagree that biased reporting has contributed to a decline in trust in the news media? Okay, let's wait for the finding. It may take just a minute to tabulate everybody. And 95% of you are saying in this seminar that bias reporting has contributed to a decline in trust in the news media, with 5% saying that it does not. So we can talk more fully about this in the Q&A if there is interest. Now, to be honest, all these findings are a bit painful for me personally, because for more than 30 years, I thought of my profession as being a way of trying to serve a greater good, to give voice to the voiceless. I thought that of journalism as a service job, sort of like being an EMT or an emergency room doctor who helps people in a crisis, except by giving them the facts, the information that they need. My idealism is such that, to me, journalism is church, and now deception and propaganda have broken through the doors and are reaching for the pulpit. So what has happened to journalism that has weakened its defenses against misinformation? And what might that tell us about when to trust and when to doubt? Yes, it is true that print and broadcast journalism are changing radically to adapt to the ongoing internet revolution. Yes, this revolution has already contributed to the failure of old funding models and the demise of hundreds of local newspapers nationwide. And yes, new technologies are creating ever new ways for misinformation and deception to be amplified unchecked. But it is also true that as journalism struggles to adjust to this in this transition, both traditional and emerging media companies are pushing for more clicks, more circulations, and more ratings. And this is one reason why cable news and radio sound more biased, why their owners have hired more and more people who are not journalists, but are instead what were once called opinionators, people highly skilled at venting their personal opinions. Outrage sells, unfortunately, which is one reason why the line between news and opinion is also blurring on some news sites and even in newspapers as well. Thus, one key to sorting out the truth in today's overwhelming volume of information is to try to assess the motivations of your sources of news. Ask yourselves, are they giving you verifiable information? If not, is the information well-sourced, i.e. quoting people who are in a position to know firsthand what is happening? Is it corroborated by other legitimate sources, or better yet, with credible data? Does the information seem reasonable and thoughtful? If your sources of news are shouting at you, it's a bad sign. Does the information seem weighted to convince you to think a certain way? If your sources of news are not trying to convince you of something, it's a good sign. While it can be harder to find, quality journalism is still very much alive, and it's been documenting what's been happening, not with broad brushstrokes, but with attention to detail. For example, even if you've already seen it, the ITN report about the violent invasion of the US Capitol last month is worth rewatching. We have a short clip. Please forgive us for any buffering problems you may experience. I think you'll get the drift. Let's take a watch.
This is exactly what was feared, but in no way is this a surprise. It has been fueled by the president's rhetoric, and it's increasingly clear This election has not healed the wounds. It has simply amplified them. We followed the aggrieved and infuriated Trump supporters as they stormed the building.
I swear that's CNN, and they just said these guys.
Through broken windows and doors they had forced open.
That they changed the rules mid-game and they're not being held accountable, and that's a shame.
What's your message to the Capitol Hill police and to lawmakers here?
This is our country, this is our house. That's it. This is our house. This is our country. This is our country.
Now, if you've had any trouble seeing this clip, we have posted it in the chat below, and you can watch it there or Google it, and you can watch it in its entirety. After watching this report, I think most of us would likely agree that the reporting took courage, and it gives us a more nuanced look at the invasion and the motivations behind it than were easily found elsewhere. We could hear the reporter, Robert Moore, persistently ask the question, why are you doing this? Why are you here? The report documented what was happening rather than try to tell us what we should think about it or feel about it. And I think that gave it credibility, which is the reason why it went viral with more than 11 million views. Another example, perhaps even more impressive, is an investigative story in the Washington Post about the crackdown on the people who were protesting the death of George Floyd, remember, near Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. on June 1st, 2020. As you might remember, there was a lot of confusion about why and how the protesters were forcibly removed before the then president walked to the front of a church and held up a Bible. The Washington Post investigated, matching the timeline of videos, and there were a lot of them, with what the authorities were communicating with each other over the scanners. And the Post also looked at the hard evidence to find the truth. We can't show you the entire report, but we do have a clip. And again, please forgive the buffering problems that you may experience. It's worth still watching with those buffering problems.
At 6:35 on H Street, Park police officers rush again toward the protesters. Other officers quickly follow. A chemical grenade is rolled. It is unclear by whom. A large explosion is heard. CNN cameras filming the scene from above show the crowd turning and running. A Park police officer strikes an Australian cameraman with a shield and grabs his camera. Another officer is seen swinging a baton at reporters' back as she and the cameraman flee. Park police push a group of protesters west on H Street.
Keep moving. Head down. Keep moving. Keep moving.
A protester films pepper balls fired toward the crowd. They can be heard striking the ground.
Keep moving. Keep moving. They got pepper balls. Keep moving.
A member of the Park Police SWAT team throws a sting ball grenade into the crowd. The devices are designed to explode, firing rubber balls in a radius of up to 50 feet. Several Park Police SWAT team members and a member of the Bureau of Prisons tactical team are seen firing pepper balls into the fleeing crowd.
Stop shooting them! Why are you shooting us? Why?
In a matter of minutes, the skirmish line surges past St. John's Church. Police pause a few feet beyond the intersection. On camera, a Park Police officer wearing a yellow helmet is seen gesturing at officers to hold the line at 16th and H Street Northwest. A minute later, on 16th Street, a Park Police SWAT team officer crouches down to roll a chemical grenade toward the protesters.
Tear gas bomb right at our feet. We're going to move back from this right now.
Arlington units, we are going all the way to I Street. Copy I Street.
A line of at least 12 mounted Park Police officers are deployed to disperse the crowd. At 6:44, the president begins to speak in the Rose Garden. He's minutes away from leaving the White House to go to the church.
My fellow Americans, my first and highest duty as president is to defend our great country and the American people.
Outside, officers detain protesters. Officers push protesters more than a block west along H Street to 17th Street, where the protesters are forced south. Yellow smoke rises from 2 chemical grenades thrown onto the street. Although police and White House officials have denied that it was used, a WUSA 9 television reporter at the intersection recovered a spent canister labeled CS, a substance commonly known as tear gas. He later posted a photograph of it on social media. CNN airs a shot directly above St. John's Church, showing the square, which had been packed with protesters at the start of the hour. It is empty, except for law enforcement officials. At 7:02, President Trump walks out of the White House, accompanied by Barr, Milley, and Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense. They begin the walk across Lafayette Square for the 3-minute photo op.
Is that your Bible? Your Bible?
Two members of the team behind this investigative work join us now. Nadine Ajaka was the senior producer of the report, and Eric Rich, a deputy editor of on the Washington Post investigations desk, was an executive producer. Welcome to you both, Nadine and Eric.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for having us. I really appreciate the issues that you're bringing into focus here are so important. It's happy to be able to help talk about them.
Thank you. Well, let's begin with this confusion that was happening in America about exactly what went down. Nadine, how did that influence? As I remember, their emotions were running high, people debating, though the facts were not really in. How did that influence how you worked, how you put this report together?
Well, and I think we were really pretty clinical about it, to be honest. We established a vantage point for the several hours of footage that we had sort of in culmination. We synced all the footage together so that we sort of knew what was happening from a variety of angles. And then the map of all the vantage points in conjunction with the synced footage allowed us to really visualize the skirmish line and how it shifted. And so I think, that was sort of clarifying and revealed a lot of new information that hadn't previously been out there.
And also, it's interesting because there was so much misinformation. It seemed not just confusion, but misinformation, Eric. And I also note that this report was published, it seems to me, based on my count, 5 days after the action. So what does that say about how long it can take to figure out the truth in a situation like this? And how do you choose when to put in the time?
Yeah, I mean, choosing the sort of target for our efforts is like one of the big eternal questions. But I think for us, this was clearly a historic event of incredible importance. And there was a lot of confusion and debate about who was present, who did what munitions were used. And, and of course there was video everywhere. So for us, it was sort of the perfect opportunity to gather all that video and put it on a timeline, and be really rigorous about analyzing it, both for the very big, sort of like, how does it all fit together? Where were the skirmish lines and that sort of thing, and create sort of a bird's eye view of the event where there was none, but also in the very small, and like, what are the patches and what are the lapel pins on the officers who are present that might indicate, which federal agency they were working for. And, and we were able to put those things together in this piece that I think hopefully answered some questions about what had actually took place.
I think it did. And also, to add to your point about the small, also what kind of devices were not reported to have been used, but there was evidence were used. So I think that is to your point. I want to bring in the panel we've created. We have a panel of current and recent American university students who also have questions for the two of you. Let me introduce Mary Dent, Malika Ravindran, and John Seward. Welcome to the three of you. Mary, why don't you begin? What's your question for Nadine and Eric?
Yeah, so I was just curious. It was amazing to watch this 12-minute video about the details that went down. And I was curious what your hope is for this work and moving forward. Do you see this as the future of news coverage for these types of events? Or do you think, as Eric was saying, it's so time consuming and you need to choose when to do that? So I was curious what your hopes are for this kind of work.
Eric, you want to take that?
Sure, I can speak to that. I mean, I've been an investigative reporter and editor for a while, and for me, this whole area of journalism is such an exciting innovation in the past few years, partly for the reasons that, Anne is mentioning. I mean, we're not requiring people to believe, that we, what a person told us, or to believe our, reporting about an anonymous source. I mean, this is a very persuasive material. When you show visual evidence, it becomes incontrovertible in some ways, particularly if you can bring to it close analysis so that, it's clear that, people are extracting the right information from what they think they see, the true information. So I'm very excited about it. And, we didn't start it. I mean, I really have to just incredibly express my appreciation for the work of people like Bellingcat and BBC Africa Eye and the New York Times Visual Investigations Unit. I mean, and others. I mean, a lot of people, and you see a lot of it after the Capitol Hill siege. The Journal has done some incredible work, and just a lot of incredible storytelling out there based on this kind of information that I think it's hard for people to look at this and not believe what they're seeing, because, it's a picture or a video.
It sounds like your answer, though, does say that this is something that is happening more and more, to answer Mary's question. And since it's good, I think that's a great sign. Malika, what is your question?
Hi, so my question is really for the both of you. As investigative journalists, do you feel the need to explain or justify your credibility when people question your biases and when you're out in the field?
Do you want to answer that question, Nadine? I mean, you want to take it?
Sure. Well, I had to say, I do a lot of this from, sitting behind my computer screen at a desk. It's really my team that's kind of out there talking to people. I think we are fortunate in some ways because we are using visual evidence. And so if something, I think Eric alluded to this point in his answer a little bit earlier, it's like, if something, it's just very plain, and we really show our work in that way. And that, I feel like, is in its own way an answer to this bias question, because we can say, well, we mapped 100 of these visuals, and we put them all together, and here's what they show from a variety of different angles. And we're not being selective about it. We're not isolating certain clips and putting them out on social media to propagate a certain narrative. We're really trying to kind of show you the big picture, and that, I feel like, is has kind of speaks for itself in a way.
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding. To be trusted, you have to be trustworthy, and if you can show that you have been, then the trust increases. Eric, do you want to take that question too? Because I know you oversee teams that may face that.
Yeah, I mean, like Nadine, I'm also not in the field, but my reporters are, and I mean, we're, very dispassionate in our work and try to, assess all angles. And I would say that transparency is a sort of large focus of my team's work. And we try to tell readers what we know and what we don't know, and you saw some of that in the video clip that, that was played just a few minutes ago. So I think that is sort of the way that we, we make clear we really push people to go on the record in our stories. I mean, there's a lot of journalism that requires more unnamed sources, but most of our stories are actually, we really get people on the record and get them to speak with their names. And I think the credibility question sort of answers itself when that's happening.
John, what's your question?
Try to tie a couple things together here. Eric, I noticed that you published, or not published, but tweeted Ali Alexander's video just a few days ago. And one of the things that he mentioned was that the free press isn't free. And I know Ms. Curry just a moment ago asked, how do you decide to dedicate the time to specific stories? And I think that both of those sort of get at the same issue, right? Of there is a level of control in what stories end up taking a lot of these resources. So in this particular case, how did you make that decision to put so much resource into this story?
In the Lafayette case?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was, I just felt like, and Nadine felt, and I think it was like clear for both of our teams in our discussions immediately that what had happened was so important, that understanding the specifics of it, was just a vital mission. And we had, I don't know how many people we had on that, 8 people or 9 people, or
wow,
a really significant team working, many hour days to get that done on the timeline that we did get it done on. And we're really mindful of like the competition too. So we want to publish that before the Times Visual Investigation Unit publishes theirs, or before the Journal gets theirs out, or whatever. So it was a real scramble, but one that was clear cut. And I also just would mention this piece that we did after the Capitol siege. I mean, the IGN video was really incredible that you played. We did a similar to Lafayette kind of a piece where we reconstructed what happened at the siege. And in this case, we looked at what happened inside the Capitol. Sort of the bounding points of the piece were the moment that the first window was broken of the Capitol, and then the moment when the last large group of lawmakers was safely removed, taken away from from I think the House chamber, and we're able to do a similar sort of mapping of all the vantage points and showing which parts of the Capitol were breached and how much peril the lawmakers were in. Which in particular at the time, that was 10 days, we published that 10 days after the siege. I don't think it was as clear to people as it now is, because now we've seen a lot more of that, including in the, during the impeachment proceedings, video and radio transmissions that were played, the Pence, leaving the building or leaving his, the place where he was. So that was another like massively important historical moment. A lot of video and hard to know really, what are we seeing? Where are all these people? And we just saw an opportunity to bring order to that chaotic event by doing this kind of analysis, which in that case was an even larger team working for, longer, more days and probably longer hours to get it done.
Mm-hmm. The two of you have, and your team rely, as you said a couple of times, Eric, on looking at the evidence, specifically in this case, the video. And this is a hard question to answer maybe, but have either of you any idea how you will protect this kind of documentary reporting from the increasing threat of purposely manipulated videos, which new technologies are making more and more possible? Have you been investigating this, Nadine? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I will say that the Post has actually kind of been at the forefront of this. In 2019, we developed a vocabulary to identify and label manipulated video that has now become adopted by the International Fact-Checking Network at Poynter. And we are always sort of on the lookout for new technologies that will allow us to identify all the different ways that video can be used to mislead or manipulate. I think what we do a lot of times with these reconstructions is we're putting things in context, which is what so much of misleading video on the internet consists of. It's people taking things out of context and saying, hey, this shows something from, a time and place that it doesn't actually show that, or selectively editing something. And so what we do with these reconstructions, the ones that are using, tens, even hundreds of pieces of individual videos, we're contextualizing the event. So in that way, I feel like it's pretty foolproof, like from not being manipulated and or presented in kind of a selective way. And then the actual individual pieces of video, we rigorously verify. We are oftentimes reaching out to the person who filmed the footage and we are getting the metadata and the details, and we are ensuring that the video is what it purports to be.
Right. So you're verifying again. Eric, I know that some of this video has some of the manipulated videos. Apparently, there are fingerprints. Have you yet invested as a newspaper? And if you don't have the answer to this yet, it's perfectly understandable because this is also new. But as you're trying to defend the truth from this kind of manipulation, have you been able to figure out whether it's possible that the paper can have technologies itself to discover the fingerprints of manipulation beyond what Nadine just outlined, the actual technical fingerprints?
Well, I'm actually going to refer that back to Nadine because the technical video analysis is something that her team has, a great deal of experience and expertise on. And I have one member of my team who's pretty heavily into that, but in terms of developing or having technology that will help us, I don't know, Nadine, do you have further?
Yeah, I mean, we're very invested in especially deep fake detection technology, and sort of making sure that the Post has these resources. I don't think right now, like a deep fake in the wild is kind of rare, or one that's convincing enough to sway a lot of people. I think that's rare, but I also think that time is coming. And so we as a newsroom, are really, we have a lot of technologists and, product people and engineering resources sort of devoted to this, to making sure that we have the capacity to be able to identify it when it does surface, when it does really pose a threat.
Well, I'm so grateful that the two of you, I want to thank our panel of students who and former students who've joined in asking you questions, and to Eric, Rich, and Nadine Ajaka, we thank you for your reporting and for so generously joining us here today so that we could all hear how it's working on the ground as you're fighting to really defend the truth. And it seems as though, based on what you just said, that some of the incoming is new, and you've got to stay on top of it. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks, Ann.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, you bet. So now we're going to turn to the final focus of this masterclass, and that is, how can we ourselves have greater credibility? Once, as a very green reporter, decades ago, I happened to meet a cranky, seasoned newspaper journalist. His nickname was Spud. Now, either he loved potatoes or was from Idaho. I'm not sure which. We were talking about the struggle to discover the truth in complicated and controversial stories, when suddenly he blurted out, "Kid, don't trust what anybody says. Everybody wants you to tell a story from his or her point of view. You have to check everything out." Then he added, "Don't even trust your own mother. She too might have an agenda." Then he leaned in and said, "Hell, don't even trust yourself." Now, at first I was confused. Don't trust my mother? I mean, what? But then as I thought about it, I started to get what he was saying. He was telling me the job of a good journalist was to aim for the truth, not what anybody says it is, or even what I or someone I love might wish it to be. He was also telling me to protect my credibility, as it is the only true value any journalist has, and to defend the truth no matter what. My decades in the profession since that conversation have convinced me he was right. Journalism is only as good as the integrity of the people who practice it. And to have this integrity, you can't care too much about whether people like you or your work, but at the same time, you have to consistently open yourself up and listen to the criticism so you can weigh whether you can do it better. It can be painful, but you must, as Kipling once wrote in his poem, "If," trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too. It is a demanding and unforgiving profession. Even if you find and tell the truth, you might be criticized and even hated as the messenger of what people don't want to hear. If you make a mistake and get a story wrong out of carelessness or poor judgment, You might be schooled, even shunned. But if you are known to have purposely deceived the public, you will likely lose your job, as it is unacceptable. If you remember anything from this seminar, I hope you remember this. Credibility lost is never fully regained. There is always a price. On the other hand, this effort to work in a credible manner, to grow within yourselves the integrity it requires to be useful, will be useful to you no matter what profession you choose. Working for a greater good, doing your best to stay true to the truth, will likely get you noticed and respected. Even people who don't like you or understand you can't help but see in your earnestness that you are fair and can be believed. It was, I think, my reputation for fairness and earnestness that helped me convince Syria's Assad, Iran's Ahmadinejad, and Sudan's Omar al-Bashir, who was accused of genocide in Darfur, to grant me interviews, sometimes more than once. And to those of you who are considering the path of journalism, I say this: fighting for truth, as elusive as it can often be, is worth the many trials and tribulations. Practiced humbly, with a pure motivation, it can be a path of great purpose, a higher calling. While we don't yet know the future of trust and truth, as I speak, new ways of funding journalism are being explored. Publishers, broadcasters, and social media executives all face deep discontent from the very audience whose attention they are competing to capture. And radio and television companies, which helped repeal the Federal Communications Commission's Fairness Doctrine, which had once required them to present controversial issues in a balanced manner, are now under particular scrutiny. Today, we are a nation well aware of the dangers of misinformation and deception. Still, I would bet on tomorrow, when a new generation of journalists and citizens will rise to help truth up off its knees, along with the rest of us. Now, before we open up to your questions, let me mention our second seminar focuses on ethics for excellence, precisely 2 weeks from today at noon on Tuesday, March 2nd, followed by seminars about warring for truth, the fight for it, the specific nuts and bolts of how to make the right decisions, and frontline reporting, and then by interviewing. The co-producers of today's seminar, Cami Pine and Allison Wiseman, are now going to join us to take us through your questions via the Q&A at the bottom of your screens and on social media via the hashtag Credibility with Curry. Okay, so let's welcome Cami and Allison and begin that process of answering the questions.
Hi, good morning. So our first question is from the chat. Semmelman wanted to ask, how can you convey the facts when people no longer believe that the truth is true?
I think you put your head down and do it. I think that what we just heard from Eric and Nadine is a good example. You have to convey the facts in a manner that is worthy of being trusted. In other words, you work towards making sure that what you're reporting is verified, and if not verified, is corroborated. In other words, you're presenting essentially the facts in a manner that really can help people see the truth. And it's up to them to decide whether or not to believe the story. And certainly today, this question is actually it's really on point, because a lot of people struggle to figure out what facts to believe. But I think you just have to put your head down and just do it right. It's not really ultimately, journalism is not really ultimately about controlling how people look at the data, look at the information you're reporting. It's about putting out in a consistent manner, accurate reporting, accurate facts. And I found that when you just do that, just do it consistently, and do it as flawlessly as you can, that ultimately the truth wins. Allison, do you find a question?
Yes, so this next one is from Anne, and she wants to know, how do you decide which network to get your news from? when some manipulate the claims and truth about what's going on, whereas others don't?
I would highly recommend that people read their news. Only, and it's not a knock on broadcasting, which is where I spent many, many years. But I recommend that you read your news because there is more room in a newspaper or on a site for the nuance, for not the broad brushstroke, but for the details that you really need to understand what really is going on. In terms of choosing which broadcasting company in television or radio to pay attention to, I think it's really ultimately about not choosing the one that just makes you feel better that you're right about everything, but the one that is telling you what you don't know in a manner that is corroborated, is a lot more like the report we saw that I showed earlier of the invasion of the Capitol, and less like listening to a panel of pundits. I think that oftentimes it's seeing and hearing is really believing, is more likely to see the truth. Not, it's almost like sometimes I think we've moved towards being spun, and that's in many ways why we are doubtful. But instead of being spun, if we can look for the place that is actually giving you facts, sourced information, that would be how I think you should make your decision. Cami, do you have another question?
Yeah, so Brendan, also from the chat, wanted to know, how do you balance the quality of reporting with a never-ending 24/7 news cycle in the race to cover a story first?
I think it's a very good question. All these have been very good questions. Thank you, everyone. The 24-hourization of news is being felt not just in broadcasting, but also in newspapers. You're seeing newspapers having to figure out how to broadcast themselves, essentially, and how to keep up in this constant news cycle. It makes it very difficult to find what journalism is best, what makes journalism best. Reasonableness and thoughtfulness. Those are things that I think are harder to find, that they exist, as we just showed you. But I would seek those out. I mean, I will acknowledge that there's a member of my family that who is so concerned about this question that sometimes when there's a story that he really wants to just get the facts, that he'll turn to C-SPAN because he doesn't want somebody to tell him what he saw. He just wants to see what it was. He wants to hear it. I don't know that we have to make that move yet. I think that there are many news organizations that are covering it correctly, which is to say, letting you decide. Maybe there's another way I can say this. My father, when he would watch Walter Cronkite years and years ago, sometimes would, if somebody was filling in for Walter and was pejorative, just in the tone of his voice or in the subject matter that he or she would, generally he would at that time would report with. My father would start yelling at the TV set and say, "Stop telling me what to think." And then he would turn to me and say, "And see, we're being disrespected. He doesn't think we're smart enough to come up with our own opinion about what we think about what's happening. He's got to tell us how we're supposed to feel about it." When you feel that feeling, you're clearly watching the wrong newscast or reading the wrong site or newspaper. When you're feeling manipulated, that's an out for me. And I think that's right. It's disrespectful. We are. I think that viewers, readers should be respected to make their own judgments. But if they don't have the facts, it's really hard for them to come close to the truth. I'm not sure I answered the question, but I think I came close, Cami.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, Allison?
Yes, so this next one is from Andrew. It is from the chat. And I feel like you would actually be a great person to answer this question. So he is a local reporter at a local station in a medium market. And he would like to know, it's kind of like a two-parter. So the first part will be regarding to him and his crew's safety and also remaining unbiased while reporting. How does he make sure he is safe while reporting, but also make it look like he is not quote unquote marching with a crowd? So an example he talked about was over the summer when he was covering Black Lives Matter protests, to not make it look like he was marching with them, but instead reporting on it, but also being safe for him and his crew.
Right. I'll be addressing a lot of these nuts and bolts questions in our seminar, Warring for Truth. But in terms of staying safe, that is the number one job. If you're in a circumstance that is challenging, is risky for you or your team, the number one job is actually not to get the report. The number one job is that everybody is safe, and so you make decisions based on that. And ultimately, the way we worked, and I have experience in war zones and in active humanitarian disasters, is that we trusted each other. We were a unit. We hung close to each other. We relied on each other for our safety. We listened to each other's instincts in terms of when to back up, when to go forward. We didn't push people towards something that they were unable to do that would risk their safety. So that's number one, is to make sure that you are locked in with your team and that you are taking care of each other. The second part of your question, I think, is about how to make sure that you are not seen by everyone you're surrounded by who may be highly emotional as being part of one group or another, and that may add to your danger. I think that if you're with a camera crew, it's pretty obvious. In certain circumstances, in life I have worn, journalist flak jackets or signs on myself so that people understood. Although in this time, because journalists are so targeted, have become so targeted, in some circumstances, being marked as a journalist is actually more dangerous. So you have to sort of assess what that is. But I think that the third part of your question, which is about bias, I think you not working with bias is just basic. You are respectful to all the people you're interviewing. That doesn't mean you're not asking hard questions, but you're asking them in a respectful manner because they are human beings, and you're asking them because you want them to tell you something or that they deserve to be heard. So that's number one. You're asking questions, hard questions at times, very hard questions, but in a respectful manner. Let me ask you this very tough question because I want to know what your answer is. And you're not going to like the question, but here's the question. I mean, that's kind of how I would do that. And when you behave in a respectful manner, immediately it starts to take down the intensity that's directed at you, especially the dangerous intensity that can be directed at you. I've seen this happen over and over again. I have been personally threatened in covering stories, and it has worked for me, and I hope it works for you. Thank you for your question. Cami, do you have a question?
Yes, Brandon would like to know, do you have any strategies for combating your own bias?
Yes, I question myself constantly. When I'm covering a story and when I'm in the zone, wherever that is, where the story is happening, I'm constantly checking myself that I'm hearing and not looking at things with my own bias. Everyone has bias. It is a part of being human that we have learned and mislearned what's happening around us. But if we are seekers of the truth, then we have to constantly work to sort of against that thing that is within us ourselves already. There is the word that now is not popular anymore, objectivity. And it doesn't mean that actually anyone is truly objective, because we aren't. But it is the effort, you see, to seek objectivity, to seek to make it's a practice. And that's why I think journalism, a good word for it is a practice, that you're constantly practice. You ask yourself, is this true? Are you just thinking this? Is this the right, in an interview, should I actually word the question this way? Let me go back. Maybe I should word it this way so it doesn't feel like I'm putting my opinion. into the question. You know, I've failed at this at times. I was interviewing Omar al-Bashir, as who I mentioned, who was accused of genocide in Darfur, in Khartoum. And a couple of times I heard myself, you know, become accusatory because I had seen the evidence. I'd seen the villages that had been burned down, and I'd met the people who had been physically maimed or had lost loved ones. So I had brought that bias, you know, with me as to that was a war crime. But nevertheless, I think for most of that interview, I was able to check myself. And then as you put that story together after the interview, after you documented the details and tried to ask all the questions, knowing that you're limited because time is limited, you know, you cover a story and then you have to upload it, as we just talked about it, within a short cycle. It's a sort of this first draft of history problem. Then you do your best at that. Then when you sit down to write the story, to constantly re-look at your writing, are you using a lot of adjectives? First, a bad sign. Adjectives are a really bad sign. Are you only putting in the loud, the emotional material, or are you bringing in thoughtful perspective? You know, I mean, it's really about that balance of. And it's a minefield to some degree. It's a challenge every time you write a story. But when you get it right and you feel like you've captured something that's real, it can have enormous dividends. And I can go into that at another point. Hopefully some of that helped you. Allison, is there another question?
Yeah, this one's from Jake from the chat. He says that you are one of his favorite journalists of all time. Just a little side moment. And they want to know, what advice do you have for someone who is looking to get into the journalism industry, and also wants to stay true to themselves? Right. This is tough. This is something that I faced as a question. Knowing all the things I've already said in this class, it's something I struggled with. And I think the first thing I would say is stay true to your ideals, but don't always necessarily wear them on your sleeve. I certainly did that, but I never, as you can hear me, as you heard me, I never lost my ideals. I knew the purpose of it, and I was going to stay true to that. So you stay true to it yourself, inside yourself, and you find people around you in wherever you're working who are like-minded and who you can build not only camaraderie, but maybe even a team with, so that you work together. In terms of the profession itself, right? It's difficult because the profession is, as I mentioned, in this major transition. But I think it's never been more open to people who are newly graduated out of journalism schools, or who are have the skills or the interest in becoming journalists, because there are just simply so many sites and platforms, and there's so much openness, especially because of technology, to young people who are more adept at using the technology than to people who, you know, are my age or around my age. So I think that in terms of where I think that today, while it's true that it would be a good idea to know how video works and to know how interviewing works, the most important thing is to know how to write and to have that skill, because in all of the things that you'll be doing, you will be writing. And I guess if I were starting today, maybe I would still start at a local television station to get the video skills. I'm not sure. I might today start at a website. And mind you, I started as an intern after graduating from college, running the studio camera and picking up the mail. So you work your way up. That's how I did it. And just the only thing I would say about starting is this: it takes time. And I really don't mean this in a manner that sounds like I know so much, but it's true that it takes time to develop the judgment, the skills that I just talked about, where you're constantly able to sort of make sure that you're not making the mistake of putting in your bias or only hearing the bias that
support your point of view. It takes time to develop those skills. They're like a muscle. And so if you begin early, just keep learning so that you don't make the mistakes that can ultimately affect your credibility, which, as I said, when lost is never fully regained. Cami?
Yeah, so Elizabeth from the chat wanted to ask, with social media and the decimation of news so closely intertwined, how do we separate the personal connection from the quality of the content?
Say that. I'm not sure I understood the question. Could you repeat that?
How do we separate the personal connection from the quality of the content in the context of social media and the decimation of news?
I still don't understand the question. How would you understand that question?
I think what she's asking is, with social media and people sharing things on their news feed being like just a part of social media at this point, how do we separate our personal connections from people versus what they're sharing?
Oh, I see. I know that's hard. That's very, very hard. I think that if I could say anything about that, it may not answer the question directly. It is that just as I talked about the importance of assessing the motivations of your sources of news, I think that the people around us and we ourselves, whether we're going into journalism or not, need to take responsibility for what we are sharing and what we're not sharing on social media. If it fails to meet the smell test for accurate reporting, if it does not sound like or look like credible reporting based on well-sourced or verifiable information, I think we have a responsibility to not share it. And I think it's okay to tell people who we care about, and I do, to not share information that you don't believe is probably true based on your read of the information. That you have to take responsibility in this climate that we're in for standing up and defending the truth. So I would say that would be part of what is, I think, a responsibility of a citizen in this country, and actually in any country, given that social media is everywhere. I do think, though, more specifically to your question, that no matter whether you agree with somebody or not, and what they've uploaded or what they've shared, have the respect for them to listen and to understand why it is that they care so much to share something that you disagree with, and to sort of hear them. I think the struggle today is that we don't hear each other, and that we hear ourselves and the people who think like us really loudly. And we make misjudgments about each other. This is a pervasive problem today. I think we all have a role to help fix it, and we have to help fix it in our own families, among our friends and our communities and our cities and our states and our country. And that's how it's going to fix. That's how we're going to heal. I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer the question. I took a shot. I hope it helped a little bit. Allison, do you have another question?
Yeah, and I just want to let you know it is 1 o'clock. So do you want to take a few more, or how do you want to go about doing that?
Well, I just want to, before people, I'm sure a lot of people have got to go. So I will take questions after saying something to kind of take a few more questions if people want to, if there are more questions who want to stay, for people who want to stay. But before I do that, let me just thank everyone for caring about defending the truth and for joining our seminar. Thank you to the Sign Institute and to American University for allowing me to teach these seminars. Thank you to our guests of the Washington Post and to all of our student panelists. And thank you to our Empowering Truth team led by Christina Barnes, who is our Zoom webinar leader, and also to Allison and to Cami, who are our co-producers. So for all of you who are leaving, we'll see you again. Possibly you're invited in 2 weeks' time, same place. We'll see you then. For those of you who want to continue to ask questions, I'll stick around. So Allison, is there another question you want to ask, or how are we doing?
Yes, there is another one. So Alexander wants to know, do you think that someone who came to the Capitol on January 6th, who already had the belief that the election was stolen, would regard the video that was played from the Washington Post article as unbiased reporting? And do you think that the media did a good job reporting on the election results as a whole in a way that built credibility instead of reinforcing the idea that they are part of the Blue Coalition?
See, I think the struggle with that question is that it's a monolithic question, right? It's a question that says the news media as a whole. And what's really happened to some of the media is there is really good media that's really trying to do excellent reporting, and there has been a move towards more extremism in the media. So it's really hard to sort of, again, this is a broad brush answer, right? Did the media as a whole do a good job? Well, there are those in the media that did, I think, a terrible job, and there are those in the media that did a really good job. And so it's hard to sort of, it's almost unfair to those who did a really good job to say, no, they didn't do a good job. I think that there wasn't enough reporting about the invasion of the US Capitol, as we saw in the ITN report that we showed by Robert Moore and his team. I think that while I don't think that all news teams should could have even safely done that kind of reporting, even if you just listen to the kind of the words that Robert Moore used and how he asked the participants in that invasion their questions and what he showed, it wasn't really about judging what had happened, although certainly politically there's every reason to judge it. But as journalists, the job is to tell people, to show people what's happening, to tell them as honestly as possible what's happening. And that was an ITN report. As for the Washington Post report, which was about the Lafayette Square clearing, the action by authorities there to make way for the president, the then president, how would those people, I think the question was, who invaded the Capitol feel about the Washington Post reporting? I think that they may not 100% love it, just because they may have wanted more reporting that said that the president was standing up for law and order, as he said, and that it was a good example of that. But that again is pejorative information. That's not actually reportable information. That's just if the president makes that tie, then you can say he says he is standing up for law and order, and that's why he's doing this action. In other words, your job is not to insert your assumptions or your opinion into the material. It is rather to document as much as possible, to tell the truth as much as possible, knowing that it is a difficult and almost to some degree impossible job. It really is so hard that it can feel at times impossible. Nevertheless, worth the attempt, because that's how people can make their own minds up. So I guess ultimately, I think that there was a lot of courage displayed in the coverage of the election. I think that there are a lot of mistakes that were made, and I think entire books will be written about this for journalism classes like this, and in the future. And I'm not sure I can answer that question fully now for you, and I wish I could do a better job. But I would say that the media, some of the media failed miserably, and I would say that some of the media, news media, excelled with great courage and overcame the challenge of bias that I think your question specifically is addressing. Cami, do you want to ask another question?
Yes, Samira would like to ask, what are the skill sets that this kind of journalism requires that will be most demanding in the coming years?
I think that's a really good question. I think that given the state of where we are in America, the emotions, sorry, my dog I think is running through the picture, one of the key is to be able to think quickly, because you have to report quickly information that people are going to wonder whether or not you're biased. In other words, the assumption is already not to trust you as a reporter. The assumption is already skeptical. So one of the great challenges today in journalism is simply to do your job and not care about too much about whether somebody is skeptical. Just care about getting it right. Care about whether you have done your due diligence in verifying what you're reporting. Make sure that you attribute. Don't report something without attributing, if at all possible. And also, if you ever use off the record information, you really need to make sure that your source of that off the record information is trustworthy. My rule of thumb is that I generally don't use off the record information unless I have 3 sources. And that's a big bar, that's a very high bar. Unless one of those sources is in a position to absolutely know the truth of the story. If, for example, what is happening in the White House, the source of your information is the person who's directly working with the president. That person I would probably trust for off the record information. And even then, I would wonder, what is the motivation for that person giving me the information? So it's constantly, again, just as looking at news and assessing which news to believe in requires you to think about, well, what is the motivation of this source of news? It is also true for a journalist, whenever you get information, to constantly weigh, what is the motivation of this person giving me this fact? And so that's what the struggle is. Journalism is, by people, about people, for people. And people are humans. And so fundamentally, it is vulnerable to the mistakes that humans make. And so one of the great things about developing the skills of doing journalism is the constant honing that you're learning as you do the work to become better at making fewer mistakes, because you're able to judge more quickly not just the motivations, but how to weigh the information that you may be reporting. We are now at 9 minutes past the hour. Are there any other questions that you guys think are important for us to address, or is that a yes, Cami?
Yeah, there's one more that I think would be a great one to address. It's also from Samira, and they want to know, how do you protect children, youth from seeing the news, but also teach them enough that they are aware of what's going on? It's like, essentially, how do you not bombard them with the news where there's a constant 24/7 news cycle, but also give them enough exposure for them to know what's going on?
And you're talking about very young children, so I think that's
like teenagers, yeah.
I think that being a citizen in this country, you want to develop early a sense of a sense of responsibility to be informed about what's happening, because we are a democracy, a flawed one, but the effort is that an informed populace will essentially decide how this country moves into the future. So we can't do that without people being informed. So developing that muscle early is, I think, a good idea. These days, we don't need our televisions, to be honest, to be on all 24/7. We can watch the news or get alerts, with a device. So you can figure out when to turn the TV on and when to turn the TV off. Or if it's not television, and we're not even talking about, because a lot of young people are not paying attention to broadcasting, but rather finding their source of news elsewhere. I guess if I were, I have 2 children, and if they were young, and younger and in their teens, I think I would have dinner conversations with them about the importance of being informed, about the vulnerability of information, why the truth is so vulnerable, why people want to control it, manipulate it, and how to figure out how to stay informed in that climate. And so I would talk about that first. And then I would probably watch stories or at dinner or whenever you're hanging out with them, talk about how stories were covered and whether you think this worked or whether that worked. I mean, my children were very young during 9/11 and we lived near the downtown area. And so they were exposed probably a little bit too young to the constant playing of the towers falling. And so I had to really rethink, because I was reporting on the story. And so I wasn't actually home when this was happening. So finally I had to sort of seize control of that, because you can bombard children with too much too early. But I think that talking it out is my best advice on this. And then really it's because I want young people to have hope, not just to have hope, but to know that this time will change. Change is the one thing we can count on. This moment of acrimony will change, and that we all play a role in it. That I would want to inform them and talk to them about that. So that would be what I would do. I guess that would be my best answer to that. Hopefully it was somewhat useful. Cami, are we done, or do we have any more questions?
We have a bunch more questions.
Okay, I'm here.
Up to it.
If the questions are interesting, if you think we want to ask them, you're a co-producer, let's go.
Yeah, 100%. So Rose and Terry both had a similar question about the fairness doctrine. They wanted to know what you think would be an appropriate way to either re-indoctrinate the fairness doctrine, or if we should just kind of get rid of it.
So the fairness doctrine is no longer in existence. It happened, I believe it was begun in the 1940s, I believe. Anyway, very early on. And it was a FCC requirement that broadcasters allow multiple points of view on controversial subjects. And it didn't, at that time, cable did not exist. So it really was about mainstream ABC, CBS, NBC broadcasters, and I believe also radio. In fact, I'm sure it was also radio. There was a real reaction to it. The Supreme Court supported it, but there was a strong argument made by broadcasters that it actually impinged their ability to cover all diverse points of view, and they argued very loudly against it. There were others who argued against it, and President Ronald Reagan decided ultimately that he supported getting rid of it, and it was killed. If it was in existence, it probably would not have impacted cable news because it didn't cover really cable news, which is sort of a side. Something erupted after the fairness doctrine was created. So, but the question I think is really ahead. What happens next? Look, government intervention is something that the First Amendment really tries to protect us against. But we are in a moment where we have to sort of ask ourselves, if news media owners, if publishers and broadcast company owners are unable to take responsibility and police themselves in presenting journalism in a fair and balanced manner, I think this question is going to have to come up, and we're going to have to ask ourselves, does there need to be a rule that just simply says, we're not going to tell you what to do, but be fair and balanced? I don't know. I hope not. I hope that this moment has been an awakening. But of course, everyone is worried because of the economic pressures. not only to survive, but in some cases, some companies are trying to do more than survive. They're trying to thrive, and I think it's also upon us, the rest of us as news consumers. What is it that you're watching? Why are you so attracted to outrage? Why do you pay attention to the drama and the thoughtlessness and the unreasonableness? So this is on all of us, I think, to some degree. It's a dangerous, it's a slippery slope. I hope we don't have to enact it, but it certainly seems to be on the table. And it'd be interesting to hear what the American people feel about this, given especially these poll numbers that we've been looking at. Allison, any more questions?
Yeah, so we have one from Erica. She said that she is starting her own news site, but finds it challenging to interview sources that are starting out because she doesn't have the same credibility as other news sites do. So how does someone like her build this type of community and credibility with people to feel comfortable being interviewed by her?
Well, I think it's like building blocks, right? You do an interview with someone, and you did a good job at at finding truth and telling the story honestly, and you say and you build it in that manner. You earn your reputation as a journalist over time. People will come to expect, and they'll understand that you're not perfect. They'll understand, because no one is. But they won't understand if you are biased, if you are unfair, and if you deliberately manipulate information. So if you just sort of stay on the right side of things and operate with integrity, it's a slow build. If you connect with, I guess I would suggest to her, if she doesn't have the time to wait for that build, to maybe connect with others who are also doing that, or who may also have developed some credibility, and to maybe sort of together build something faster. They say that if you, what is that quote? I'm not sure I'm going to get it right, but if you want to go fast, go together. If you want to go slowly, go alone. It may be just the opposite, but whatever that quote is, I think that when we team up with others, and not just because of the support that others who are like-minded may think, like-minded, what I mean about that is not like political-minded, but like-minded in terms of the work and the importance of the work and why you have to work with integrity and all that stuff. That when you work with a team and develop a group where you can work within, I think ideas come faster, and I think you achieve more and more quickly. So hopefully that helps. Allison, what question did you find?
I was actually wondering if I could ask a
Okay, Cammie, go ahead.
So Brandon wanted to know what the most rewarding story to cover has been thus far in your career.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, it's tough. There've been a lot of stories have come to mind, but maybe one of the most rewarding stories, and the one that always strikes me, and one I can't forget, and it's sort of probably a surprising choice, was a story that I was able to argue for and get green-lighted, taking a team to Congo, which at that time had a war that had been going on for so long, and it killed so many people that more people had died there in a forgotten war than had died at that time in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. And a lot of the victims were women and children, and women were persistently being raped to the point where there were entire villages where it was hard to find a woman who had not suffered some sort of sexual violence because of the war. And I took a team there, and the team had to go before me because I had to anchor something. So I got there late, and they showed me some tape that they'd already shot of a woman who had talked about the violence. But they shot the video in a manner that looked like how you could have imagined right now, sitting where you are, of a woman in Africa talking about this story. It's like you could have imagined, you can visualize it right now, what that would look like. And I had come to conclude after my decades of reporting and spent a lot of time overseas, and I would say that would be really, even despite how people know me as an anchor, that is actually, I think, my biggest legacy is in international reporting. I'd come to understand that we can't shoot stories and tell stories like they're about, like in a manner that shows somebody who is a woman in Africa. In other words, we have to shoot and write and tell stories as if we're talking about our mother, our father, our sister, our brother, our daughter, our son. We have to tell stories about that are not pre-imagined, but are real, is what I'm trying to say. So I said, let's start again. And they agreed. And we went and we found a story quite by accident that was exactly this. And I'll make it brief because I've gone on a bit, but we took a long journey to a hospital where women were being treated for the sexual violence. And the doctor who at the hospital, who was the only doctor, was so shocked and so happy that somebody from the outside world had come to take a look at what was happening, that he pulled us immediately into an operating room without any warning, where we saw this young woman who was about 17, 18 years old, lying, getting ready for surgery under a blanket. She was naked underneath a blanket. And I saw her hand next to her shaking. It was obviously cold in the room. It was on a metal table and it was shaking. And I just instinctively just grabbed her hand because I could see the gravity. Emotionally, I was just sort of seeing the gravity of the situation. It was an odd thing for me to do, but as a mother, I sort of couldn't help do it. So I held her hand for a minute just to kind of calm her down because she was clearly scared. I backed out of the room. Clearly, I said we were not in the right place. I said, guys, let's go. So we got out of the room. We backed out of the room. And then the next day we returned and we found her, and I apologized for walking in, told her who we were, explained what we were doing, and said if she wanted to talk to us, she could. And if she didn't want to talk to us, that's okay. So whatever she decided. And she decided to talk to us. And she said this. She said that she watched her parents killed one by one, and that she was taken hostage by the rebels who were fighting the government in Congo, and that they had taken her wherever they went, and they chained her to a tree, and they abused her. And it was pretty terrible until one day they decided that she wasn't worth anything anymore, and they left her chained to a tree. And she started screaming, and some people in the nearby village heard her screams, and some men broke the chains and carried her to the hospital, which is where we found her, where she was about to undergo surgery because there had been so much damage. And listening to this story, this young woman having gone through what she had gone through, I thought, do you want revenge? And she said, no. What I want is to rise from this bed and thank the people who saved me, who rescued me. I want to work for God. And maybe if I'm lucky, I want to feel a mother's love again. We put that story on television, on the evening news, on NBC News. And the phones lit up. People were calling and asking. At that time, the internet was sort of starting, but it was really on the phones, and people sort of sending emails, really, saying, oh my God, so stunned, trying to figure out, can I help this woman? What is happening? It was just a flood of people concerned. And it was rewarding to me because I realized that many of these people may or may not know easily, quickly, how to find Congo on a map. And yet, and they may not have thought about what was happening in Congo. It was a forgotten war. But they connected to this young girl in the middle of Africa. And they saw her not as a girl in Africa or somebody out there. They saw her as their daughter, as their sister. They saw them They saw her as a human being who they cared about. And that, I think, is the job of reporting, is that is the truth, is to connect, to break down the walls that separate us from each other and to see what's really going on. And I think that's actually part of the job, and the reason why when I think about that particular story, there are other examples I can give, but that particular story has always stayed with me. And I, you know, I've always wanted to find her again. But thank you for your question. I hope I answered it in some manner. Should we end on that note, guys, or do you want to continue?
I think that's a great note to end on.
I think that's a really good ending.
Okay. If there are more questions, I'm sorry I'm not getting to them. It's already 27 minutes after 1, so we've gone a bit. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you for joining us, and we will have another seminar here in 2 weeks at noon, and it will be about the ethics that can help us achieve excellence as journalists. But as I have said, I think these are good things to think about no matter what you do in life. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.